Hello everyone, welcome to a new episode of Weaponry and Theorycrafting. As is obvious, we'll be looking at Draug, Gunter, Jagen, Haar, Subaki, Beruka, and Raigh. Now, I don't typically do Gen 3 units, but Haar has been ruined so hard that it's kinda stupid. So I figured might as well just do that. So, alright, let's first off move with Draug. So, Draug is typically this kind of armored dude that basically protects everyone around him. As a matter of fact, one of his endings literally describes him as Stalwart. I didn't realize that until I actually picked the name, because I realized Stalwart was kind of a very good way to describe the way I wanted to use his weapon. But to put it simply, the way the weapon works is obviously it's a slaying edge. The first effect is just Mur's weapon, but harder to proc because it's based on having 10 more defense than the enemy. Because if it was only 5, considering he has the... I don't know if he has the highest amount of defense in the pool anymore, but his defense used to be the highest for a long time, if anything. So, yeah, at that point, you know, 5 def is not enough, so I made it 10. I was actually debating making it 15, but then I realized that would be a bit too much. Because someone with like 25 def would just not, you know. So, yeah. As for the refine itself is a bit more difficult to explain, but to put it simply, if the number of sword and bow allies within 2 space are 2 or more, based on obviously his supports with Marth, Gordon, and Norn. Norn is, I believe, a replacement unit, and she's a bow unit, so, you know. And apparently Draug develops romantic affection for her? I never heard of this, but then again, no one talk about Draug, so, But yeah, if the number is 2 or more, foes cannot move through spaces adjacent to unit, so essentially similar to obstruct. But then I added a second clause, which is and foe cannot attack allies within 2 space of unit. It's a hard restriction, but at the same time, if you do fulfill it, every unit around Draug just cannot be attacked until he dies. Which is basically the entire idea. So he basically functions as a shield for everyone around him, based on obviously Marth, Gordon, and Norn. So he's basically trying to shield his friends. It's a basic idea, but I figured it would be actually not a bad idea since he's meant to be a tank in the first place. Especially if you decide to just go all the way with res buffs and, you know, other things, such as, you know, warding stance, seal, and A skill. You're looking already at 39-30, which is kind of the entire idea. Yes, you would be a good def tank to just go all the way with def to just prevent follow-ups, but then mages do so much damage that it doesn't really matter, does it? You still take way too much damage. If you have double warding stance, buffs, and, you know, Marth buffing with drive res, you're looking at upward to 45 in both when it comes down to bulk, which makes you extremely tanky. Not to mention, his speed is already good enough to deny a good chunk of follow-ups, especially with Marth supporting him, that it feels like he should be fine, is the idea. But at the same time, you know, you can just build in defense and completely ignore res, and depending on what you're fighting, you can actually block armored units, which tend to have roughly the same number as Draug, if not only like 5 points lower. It comes down to the situation you would be using him in, but overall, it would definitely be a lot more helpful than just not having a pref, let's just put it that way. Moving on to Gunter. Now, before I move, I know a lot of people expected me to never refine those guys because it's just really difficult to come up with something for them because of how low is their BST. Well, I kind of used the whole point that their BST is so much lower to the advantage here. Now, you have to understand also, this is basically nothing, it's based on nothing, right? Because if I was to base it on something, it would probably be worse than what it is. So, I based it on the fact that they're veteran, essentially. Just think of the idea of, you know how trainee units always tend to have a fuck ton of BST for no reason? Like how Na has 173 BST despite the fact that she should not even be a trainee. Well, since trainee seems to be inexperienced people that just have a ton of stats for no reason, I decided to use the idea of veteran as people that lack stats but has the knowledge and experience to back up their combat skills. So to put it simply, they make up for the fact that they have low BST with combat experience. So that's kind of the idea. Now the base effect is very simple. Jagen and Gunter have a very similar effect. Jagen is more, you know, based on DC, warding stance and so on and so forth. And Gunter is more based on defense. That should not surprise anyone, that's kind of how they're built. So Gunter gets steady stance, and Jagen gets warding stance. Gunter gets dull close, and Jagen gets dull ranged. It's very simple, as you can expect. Though, on second thought, I would have probably been better to instead make a different type of dull, which would not have worked on Dragon Stones for Gunter, but would have worked on bow and daggers, and, you know, vice versa for Jagen, but I feel like that would have been too much, you know. So, if your net stats total are less than the foe when calculating stat total, treat bow, dagger, magic, and staff stats, stat total, as plus 10. Now, for all people who don't fucking understand what that means, let me just explain. Every unit has this stat called BST. I'm sure most people have at least heard the term. BST does not increase as you merge. The only thing that will change because of the merge is the fact that you get rid of the Bane, which means you have more BST as a result. But the stat you gain from the merge itself does not add to the BST. So for example, say I'm using Ira, and she has 163 BST, and then I merge her up, getting rid of, say, attack minus. That 163 would jump to 166. That's the BST number you're at. So, by comparison, Gunter is a lot lower. 51, 75, 107. He's at 150. Okay, so let's say I'm comparing to Ira. Obviously, that's a terrible matchup, but 166 versus 150, that's 16. You take 40% of this, you get 6 across the board for free. It's very simple. It's just, it's all about understanding what BST is. BST is just all your stat combined without any weapon, without any A skill, without any seal skill, without any of those skills. Just your stats. Okay? So, that's what your BST is. So the fact that, you know, Gunter has such a low BST and so does Jagen, in fact Jagen has 1 point less, is extremely helpful. So at the end of the day, say you're fighting, for example, Brave Hector, who has 25 BST above you, because that's kind of how Brave Hector works, 174 to 175 BST. You'd be looking at plus 8 across the board. Add to that, you know, cav buffs, and you're looking at essentially 62 attack, 38 speed, 47 defense, 32 res. That's without an A skill, that's without a seal skill, that's just the weapon at work with buffs. Which makes you a fantastic dispatcher of melee units, but dragon units will still, you know, kick your ass. And on top of that, buffs that are like, such as attack tactic and so on, would not work on Brave Hector, because those would just be negated. And on top of that, you get a 6 death on enemy phase, making your defense 53. It would make you a very solid tank against melee foes. And that's kind of good, but at the same time, if you're fighting someone with low BST, and that's also one of the reasons why bow, daggers, magics, and staves gets a +10 to their stat total, because otherwise they would literally have less BST than he does. So doing this means he still has some kind of advantage against bow unit. Units such as Alm literally are considered as 172 BST, which means he gets the full +8 across the board as a result. So yeah, it's been an idea I've been thinking of for a while, but I just didn't have an idea on how to put it on paper until the last Refined Theorycrafting. Jagen has basically the same refine, except like I said, it's based more on res with warding stance, dual ranged, and of course the same effect, the same refine as Gunter. It's one of the reasons there is 7 refines on this Refined Theorycrafting. I wanted to do 6, but Jagen and Gunter are basically like a dual refine, so I was like, I'll just count it as 1, you know. And here we are. Moving on to Haar. Now, I feel like I might have went a bit overboard on this one, but then again, he's kind of a fan favorite and should be treated as such. Fizzard's Legacy. This is based on his, well, kind of father. His father figure, I guess. I keep thinking his name is Reshiram, but no, it's, I think it's Shiraham Fizzard. So, I based it on him. The only thing we have when it comes down to Haar, as far as, you know, weapon he's used is a Brave Axe, so it's just going to be a Brave Axe. There's just nothing I can do about it. And the second effect is Guard. It's just Guard. Since he kind of comes with it in Path of Radiance and by some extent Radiant Dawn. Although Guard in that game has a completely different effect. It's called Cancel. They kind of renamed it in Radiant Dawn. Cancel just block a follow-up, and I kind of did not feel comfortable putting a brave weapon that blocks follow-up, especially with the refine I gave. The refine is based on stun, one of the most broken skills that Fire Emblem has ever created. Let that sink in. What the fuck? Stun blocks any movement you can do with the unit for a turn, and triple the damage you take. I wish I could make that up, but here we are. So the way I ended up doing this is just after combat, if unit attacked, inflict status on target restricting movement to 0 space through their next action. It's fairly simple, and you might not think much of it, but the thing is, if you run this with, say, hit and run, the enemy just can't even reach you, which is kind of busted, unless they're mages, and if they're mages, you probably have killed them already. And on top of that, the weapon itself just shuts down specials, which are definitely really welcome. Then add to the fact that, well, I don't know how the AI would work about it, but here's how I think it would work. So, the way AI really work is like it moves unit first that can attack. And then it moves unit that can move, melee units, and then range units. Obviously there's also the whole assist thing changing that. But think of it this way, what if you can't move and you can't target anyone? What happens? You'd probably just not sit there and unused completely, which means as a result you can't be danced to get rid of the effect if, you know, the AI is in control of you. This skill would be busted against AI as a result. But you know what? That's fine, because it's R. And at the same time, it's kind of more of a gimmick. If you're the one facing R, you'd probably just be able to just dance the dude in most mode that matters, and otherwise you would be just able to, you know, kill him with magic, a dragon, and so forth. But still, it's kind of an interesting idea overall. Moving on to Subaki. Now, I decided to use the idea of Perfectionist and change the effect a little, because in Fates it gives you 15 hit rate and a void when your HP is full. Now, In a normal Fire Emblem game, this is pretty good because it means you can just completely avoid getting hit. If you have a lot of avoid, which Pegasus Knights do have, which means, in turn, the fact that it requires you to be at full HP is not really that big of a condition, especially in game where you just have so much avoid that it's literally, you're like in the 60s. But in Heroes, you don't have an avoid stat, so staying at full HP is a lot harder, so instead I've reduced the requirement to 75% or higher. This also works well with skills such as Quick Repose if you think your speed is not good enough. I based it on Venge Naginata. For those who don't know, what Venge Naginata does is, when you're the one being initiated on, it doubles your might on the weapon, going from 9 might to 18 might, which makes it literally the best weapon, might-wise, outside of, I believe, the Water Wheel. But the thing with the Water Wheel is it decreases your stat. Venge Naginata does not. So, it's actually a really, really good weapon. Now, instead of only 6 attack, I gave it cooldown -1 and 6 attack def on enemy phase. And before someone tells me, this is literally like Daybreak Lance, but better, what the fuck? Daybreak Lance was a terrible fucking refine, let's be honest here. If you're at the point where a Slaying Lance, refine to defense, does more or less the same thing, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say, even. You just get 2 less HP, but 6 more attack. Great. For a character like Lucas with 35 base attack, that doesn't mean shit. You're reliant on Ignis to proc, and that's the main thing. Seriously, why waste do at that point? That's the problem I have with the weapon. So, yeah, it is stronger, but that's pretty much the kind of thing I would have expected from Lucas. In fact, what I expected from Lucas was weapon refine I actually made. In fact, I don't know what episode it is, but the refine itself basically increased your defense, but also I believe your defense and your attack, but also lowered the enemy's attack, or just your defense and then reduce the enemy's attack. Which, on the other hand, means that by lowering the enemy attack, it's basically Berkut's Lance mixed with Vanguard, I believe it's called. Yeah, it's just kinda the idea behind the weapon, making bulky not against only melee foes, but also mages. Because as is, a lot of people would just not use the weapon and use Berkut Lance instead, and then just completely fix his weakness against res to some extent, and just have like 40 def and res. Which, overall, is honestly a better idea than his pref. But whatever. Moving on. So, as for the refine itself, as long as he's over 75% HP, he gets 4 attack, speed, def, and res. This is just the idea behind being a perfectionist. And it's just as simple as that. So, yeah. Moving on with Beruka. Now, by the way, before we start, I want to point out, Beruka has some very, very good ciphers. Jesus, her art on cipher is really fucking good. But moving on, so Executioner's Hacks, it's basically the same base as Subaki. Since both of them have very low attack, the extra attack does help quite a bit, and the defense just pushes their strength a bit more. Now, as for the Refine itself, after combat, if unit defeated an enemy, you know, kind of like an assassin, special cooldown count -2. Now, the idea is to basically have a cooldown -1 weapon, so your 4 cooldown Ignis becomes 3 cooldown. Get 2 charge when you kill something, so your cooldown becomes 1. Take a hit, proc. Take a hit, proc. Take a hit, proc. You get the idea. This is just to essentially give her a lot more edge when it comes down to damage and actually working a bit more like an assassin. So, yeah. It's kind of the whole idea behind it, and honestly I feel like it's very basic but also very effective. And you can run other special than Ignis with this, which is definitely interesting. You could run something like A first, so you can proc A for every fight. If you do think your attack, the way you're buffing it, will actually provide you enough attack to kill with Aether, then you're basically a tank with self-sustain. Just thought I'd point that out. As for our last member, let's talk about Raigh. Now, Apocalypse. A lot of people were expecting me to work with this, and at first I was like, no, not really. The problem with Apocalypse is that there's really nothing, there's no effect to it. That's the problem with FE6 and FE7 in a nutshell. Those weapons just kind of have nothing on them. They just have very, very high might, and then the bonus itself is very uninteresting. Like the fact that Apocalypse gives 5 magic, and you know, that's kind of it. Thankfully, it's also effective against Wyvern Riders, Wyvern Lords, and Manakete because it's a dragon killer. Now, I understand that it's not a dragon and flying killer, but I decided to do both because as it is, dragon killer by itself would be not that great overall. As for the other one, it's just based on an Alto. His stat line is just built for Alto, okay? I don't care who you are. If you don't think that, you have a bit of issue. You have a few issues because Canas came with basically the same stat line but no IVs. And guess what weapon he had? An Alto. And it was basically his best fucking weapon, essentially. So, it's the same kind of logic here. As for the Refine, if unit is within 2 space of magic or dagger ally, had 30% of total penalty on foes to units attack speed def res during combat. Maximum of +6 to each stats. Now, this is very similar to Neo. Neo being Legion's Pref. The thing with Neo, however, is it relies on your enemy having buffs. And that's why there's no limit to how much stats you can get out of it. Because at the end of the day, you have to run into very specific setup to be able to get over 6 across the board. And that's not a problem with this weapon, because you can just use one of your units with Smoke Dagger, for example, and just poof, there you go. That would be 12 across the board for Raigh, which would be way, way, way too much. That's just... no. No, 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 no. So the idea is it's lower, but you actually have more control over the fact that your enemy has debuffs. Now, as for magic or dagger allies, for those who have played FE6, it comes to no surprise, but it's based on Lu and Chad, which all have been growing up in an orphanage together. Lu is literally, I believe, Raigh's twin brother. Chad is not exactly part of the family, but honestly might as well. Someone actually pointed out something when I posted this in Sage's Discord, as I sometimes do to hear feedback sometimes. How the weapon also kind of points at his parents, which would be Nino and Jafar. I did not realize this in the making of this weapon. All I was thinking of was Chad and Lu. But yes, that also does work with his parents. Though Jafar is not the canon father, he might as well be, because, let's be honest, who the fuck else would Nino go with? So, yeah. So that was the entire batch of new characters. Tell me what you think in the comments, and yeah. I suppose we'll see what that is. I suppose we'll see what the next batch will be next month. I will also say I'm going to do another summon session, kind of like last month with New Year Gunter and such. This time the targets will be, well, Ryoma and also Eliwood by extension. If I get enough copies of Eliwood in that summon session, I might actually go ahead and plus 10 the boy. Who knows, maybe he's gonna pull a Naga. I doubt it, but I mean, I'd be okay with it. As for everything else, I think I've said my piece. So, hey, have a nice one everyone, and hope you enjoyed this. See ya!